Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Capron, and this is the Specialized Bicycles podcast, where we go behind the curtain here at Specialized to talk to the riders and creators who are sweating the details to make your ride better. Today, we're talking about everything gravel related, particularly the Diverge 4, but we're going to dip back in history to the origin of Specialized and then into the whole topic of gravel. What is it? Why is it great? Who's doing it? And what do riders really need today? Finally landing on what the Diverge 4 is bringing to riders to really expand the capabilities and the speed of gravel riding. We'll specifically be hearing from some of our key riders on the gravel scene. Ian Boswell, who won the 2021 Unbound after a long and illustrious career on the Pro Tour circuit, including Tour de France participation. We'll also hear from Matt Beers, the South African diesel, who after winning Cape Epic 3 times in a row on the mountain scene, turned his attention to the gravel scene and won the Belgian Waffle Ride, won the Tracka 200, not to mention many other accolades. And also we'll be hearing from Sofia Gomez Villafañe, who after being a cross-country champion as well on the mountain bike side, turned attention to gravel and won the Unbound in 2022. Who we have with us here today are 2 of the great minds who oversee the team that creates all of our gravel product. And that would be Stuart Thompson, who has been riding a bike since about the time he could crawl, I suspect, and then working in retail and eventually finding his way to Specialized about a dozen years ago, working his way through the product team and now oversees all the product offering on the gravel side of things. Stuart, it's great to have you.
Thanks, Ben. Great to be here.
And Luke Callahan, who in just a fortnight or so is going to be looking at 25 years here at Specialized. Amazing tenure and an incredible amount of engineering that Luke has either done directly or overseen as the leader of an engineering team. And for the gravel side, Luke oversees all the engineers that are working on all of our gravel offering, whether it's made of carbon or aluminum, everything falls under Luke's purview. So Luke, it's great to have you.
Thanks,
Ben. It's great to sit around the table and have a conversation about gravel.
Awesome.
Let's just get right into it. And before we do, though, I just want to say, when I think about gravel, I think about adventure. I think about freedom. I think about, as the name of the bike implies, diverging from the status quo. And that's really what our founder did back in 1974 when he sold his VW bus to fund a trip to Europe. And he was riding through Europe, sleeping in farmers' fields and sleeping in youth hostels when he met someone who could have an introduction with Cino Cinelli in Italy. And this, for Mike Sinyard, our founder, was like going to Mecca. And he saw an opportunity to import these hard-to-find products into the United States, which is how Specialized started in 1974. But the point of that story is the essence of what drove Mike was to get out, explore, adventure, satisfy curiosity, and discover something that's real, something that's important, that can only be discovered from the saddle of a bike. And it led to Specialized, but it's led to so many good things. And we know that whether you're working at Specialized and creating the product or you're riding the product, it's something that we all share. And I think Diverge maybe is the most quintessential expression of that idea of adventure, discovery, the resonance of moving your body through space under your own power on a bicycle. So I just wanted to mention that a little bit and then also turn attention to you, Stu, to ask, what is modern day gravel? What are the roots? Where did it come from? Where are we now? And where are we going?
Yeah, Ben, I mean, that's a big question, right? Gravel means so many different things to so many riders. Like you mentioned, that initial spirit of adventure. There's another whole angle of gravel, which is in the racing and performance side, which Specialized has so much legacy in. And I think it's going in both of those directions and more. And a bike like the Diverge is something that really can touch on all of those expressions within gravel, which is a really exciting thing.
I just want to underscore something you said, because it's quite an interesting thing, right? Like, it starts based on adventure. More people start doing it. Hey, I'm going a little faster than you, or you're going a little faster than me, and we find a way to turn it into something competitive. And that certainly is an expression now of gravel. There, are more people racing gravel than racing on the road now. That's amazing. And there's such viewership. There's a lot of interest in it, and that's great. We love to see what the limits are and to compete with others to explore that capability. What's the edge? But the beating heart still must be the adventure, I think. And both of those are alive and well within a bike, and really, I think, starts to frame up the unique challenge that was there for you guys in doing Diverge. Like, how would you say, Luke, you guys addressed that challenge from an engineering standpoint of needing a bike that was going to be very capable, but also one that was going to be very fast?
You have to balance all the elements, right? So you have traditional things like weight. We want the bike to be lightweight because you're climbing up a long hill. So there's those traditional elements like that, but there's also the confidence and capability. Those are two words that we use a lot. Confidence would be the right geometry, so it feels just right in those conditions. And capability, like you can bring packs on the bike, you can put fenders if you want on it. You can use it for commuting if you want, or you can use it for a 200-mile chunky gravel race. So there's that versatility there that people, I think, really enjoy. And what else would you say, Stu?
I think, both those angles you mentioned, it's just really critical. The performance attribute and element of things helps us make it super good at what it does,
Yep.
right? The capability side is being able to do
Yep.
a lot of
A
things.
lot with it,
right?
yeah.
So
Yeah,
we
for
can
sure.
do a lot of things, and then the performance, you can do them all
Yep.
really well. And I think that's kind of the embodiment
And
of the Diverge.
We do believe, like, riding's believing, right? We don't design bikes at our computers and kind of in a vacuum. We've got to get out there and ride it. So we make a lot of prototypes and we test the stuff out, right? If we want to test a different geometry, we'll make samples and ride it. And we're competitive by nature. I think that's just part of our DNA here at Specialized. So if there's a way to make it faster, we're going to make it faster.
I love that. And we're going to get into a lot of those aspects. And when you say testing, we test it every different way. But one of the kind of elusive elements is that being riders and an engineer or a leader of a product team, having both of those capabilities, we know the difference between what just looks good on paper and what actually performs on the terrain.
In the end, it matters what it feels like on the road or on the trail, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And Stu, you mentioned the word performance, and really what performance means to me is understanding and then exceeding the requirements of a given situation. And when we're talking about riding on gravel, we're talking about sometimes being on the pavement, sometimes being on the dirt, getting into progressively more chunky technical terrain. And, I've heard each of you talk about the Diverge 4 and really about the confidence that the bike delivers. So you feel confident to be able to pick the line you need. You feel confident that it's going to respond the way that you need to. It's going to perform. The capability, and we'll unpack what that means. And then also this idea of smoother is faster. When you jump into technical terrain and it's rough, when you can ride through the bumps instead of into and over the bumps, you move smoother, faster through those bumps.
Getting to the heart of, I think you said smoother is faster, and I think something that Diverge does better than really any other gravel bike out there is how smooth it is and how comfortable and compliant it is without giving up and sacrificing on performance. I think that's really what sets the Diverge apart from any of the other bikes out there.
What is it that makes Diverge so smooth and through that so fast, so capable, so confident?
Yeah, I think that the first part and obvious thing is Future Shock technology. And we introduced Future Shock on the Roubaix platform for road riding back in 2016. And now with the third generation of Future Shock, we've really tuned and refined that technology to the point that it is really, really a remarkable ride.
So I want to hear more about it. But first, for folks who may not be familiar, can you just matter-of-factly say, what is Future Shock technology?
Yeah, so Future Shock is a form of compliance. So it's basically suspension travel that is going in the axial path, so basically along the line of your fork and head tube. And then importantly, in this case, it's located above the frame, which ensures you have a really efficient ride below you. No energy is lost while you're pedaling, but you still get all that suppleness and suspension that you might think when you look at it.
Great. So at the steer tube, there's actually suspension that occurs. You're suspending the rider right there at the top, so you're riding through the bumps instead of into and over them. What would you add, Luke, to Future Shock?
Yeah, so I think the concept of suspending the rider, not the bike, is really important, because when we put a suspension element essentially above the head tube, which is where the Future Shock is, there's less load there than there would be if it was below the head tube. So because of that, we can tune it with the essentially lighter spring rate, lighter damping, so that it will be reactive to those smaller bumps, right?
Got it. So it's real reactive, it's real supple. You can tune it better that way, and you're still suspending the rider, which is where the majority of the mass is between rider and bike. And what about the back end of the bike? How do you guys address the suspension of the rider at the back end on the Diverge 4?
Sure. So on the front end still, so the Future Shock offers 20 millimeters of travel, right? So if we design a bike that has a nice smooth front end, that absorbs the impacts and allows you to kind of run smoother and faster over those rough elements, what we're looking for is balance, right? So we're looking to balance the feel of the bike. It's kind of like the both sides of the rider. So yeah, in the rear we have a Terra seat post, which looks like a seat post, but it's not just a seat post. So it offers quite a bit of compliance, actually, though the magic there is in the layup and material selection. And with that amount of deflection, we found it offers a good balance to how much the front end offers on the Future Shock, without the need for damping the rear end, right?
Got it.
So if you start going more travel, say like a super flexible seat post or some kind of other mechanism, at that point you start to need to damp that suspension. Otherwise, it'll be a bit out of control feeling.
I think that's really critical, actually, is we could make a seat post or system that is even more compliant back there, but when you get more, it gets out of control, or there's too much energy in that system when it comes back. And so what we've really done is we've engineered it specifically for this amount of compliance in the rear.
Perfect. So just putting this idea around suspending the rider and smoothers faster, we got Future Shock 3.0 in the front. We've got the Terra post in the back. The rider's mass is suspended between those two. You can really tune it. And even in the seat post, where it might seem just let that post be flexible, it's actually engineered for a specific amount of compliance in a specific plane. So it's moving in a vector that allows the bump forces to be absorbed, but still not moving side to side, so the rider can steer with their legs and also have...
Yeah, and that's, again, finding the balance, right?
Right.
So we need to maintain some lateral stiffness, right? Because you don't want to feel like you're kind of pogoing on the bike and getting thrown all over the place. And the vector of travel, that's important too, right? We don't want too much cockpit growth, because that feels kind of just weird. And also, compliance that is, say, purely vertical, or even along the axis of your seat tube, like a old school suspension seat post, that can feel pretty weird too. You feel like kind of the bottom, like your trap door is opening and you're kind of just falling into the bike. So we have found actually the path that the Terra seat post offers at around 45 degrees is kind of the sweet spot where it feels really natural and gives you that actually the vertical compliance.
Hey, on the smoother is faster, like what do those specs really mean? And is it just marketing like mumbo jumbo, or how do you know that smoother is faster, and who have you worked with to help identify when you're actually making differences that translate to measurable performance gains for riders?
Yeah, so performance gains is really critical, right? We want to make product that is validated by science and third-party research and doesn't just have a good story. So we worked with the University of Cologne in Germany. They have a sports science lab and facility, some of the top experts in the world. And they've done a number of studies over the years around Future Shock and its performance. So first, they've shown that Future Shock is no penalty metabolically. There's no extra power it takes to ride a bike with Future Shock. Something else they've proven more recently is basically that when riding over bumps, Future Shock technology can save you up to 11 watts of energy, depending on speed, terrain, types of bumps, etc. But basically, it's a huge energy savings that you don't have to put extra power into the pedals riding over that rough terrain.
Amazing. Okay, cool. So smoother is faster translates to actually repeatable and scientific data that's been collected and evaluated. It's not just a catchy phrase.
Yeah, and those are the performance gains. Something else they've actually found is there's an objective improvement in level of comfort that riders have when riding a Future Shock equipped bike, which is great when it comes to those long days, the fatigue you feel. Anything that makes you feel fresher for longer is, surely added performance as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the confidence comes in. If you're fatigued, if you're hurting, if you're tired, you're not as confident, you're not as on the gas, and you're going to make mistakes. So it all comes together for sure. We've been doing Future Shock for a long time, and what is going on in Future Shock 3.0 that might not be apparent when just looking at it from the outside? What have you guys tuned in that?
Right. Well, it doesn't look like a whole lot from the outside, right? You see a boot. There's 20 millimeters of travel. It is fully tunable, so you can pretty easily open it up. And there's 3 springs available. Whether you're a large rider who puts a lot of weight on the bars or somebody lighter who puts less weight on the bars, you can tune that spring rate to your preferences. You can tune the preload as well, which will kind of support you just as you're you don't sag in too much. 3 of us, we might be, say, about the same size, but we don't ride the same. We don't put the same amount of weight on the bars. Then we look at Matt Beers and Sophia, riders of vastly different size. If they're riding Future Shock, well, we believe in rider-first engineering, right? That's a concept we use throughout our frame design or bike design, and that's applied to Future Shock as well. So it is tunable.
Yeah, so critical.
Yeah.
So critical. It's got to work for that rider in that situation, or it doesn't work.
Yeah, it's gonna have riders will have a different experience depending on their shape, their size, their weight, their riding style, and we kind of want to give them a consistent experience, just kind of maximize that.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned rider first engineered, and I actually wanted to go there, and you went exactly to the example I was going to talk about. We have Matt Beers, one of the tallest riders on the circuit, and we have Sophia, one of the most diminutive, and as we'll hear from them, each of them speak to the way the Diverge handles and how it handles in such a predictable, and they actually use some of the same language to talk about how it handles.
I think for me personally, the first were just like the stability of the bike, just how planted it feels, and you can take off your hands and it's just rides in a straight dead line. And also the acceleration, like there's no real anything lost like with the pedaling. And I feel like with my size and weight, I put quite a lot of torsion through the bike. So yeah, those are the 2 things that I actually still every day, like you can definitely feel.
I think for me, the very first thing that I realized on that bike is just how good it tracks when you're going at high speed and doing technical corners. And I think that really comes from that lower center of gravity a little bit more. I never felt like my wheels were going to slide out of me, and I just felt really planted to the ground. And that was actually probably the biggest thing I could notice as an athlete. And that was like the instant feedback that I had, that I'm like, wow, this bike just tracks really well. And I just feel so confident going downhill kamikaze style. And like, I just have no worry.
I think I was hesitant coming to Future Shock from the road, where like we used to want to feel every bump in the road, and now slowly I've become accustomed to realizing that smoother is faster. I also just really love the feel and the ride of the bike. Being someone from a road background, and as these gravel races become more technical, as gravel starts to take us to sometimes more extreme environments, the geometry of the new bike, the lower bottom bracket, like it just gives me so much more confidence riding off road, because I'm maybe an experienced cyclist, somewhat experienced gravel rider. I'm oftentimes like up against riders with a mountain bike background who are just technically so much better than I am. So if I can have a bike that gives me the confidence to hang with, the best off-road riders in the world, that's exactly what I'm looking for in a bike.
And it's just amazing, riders of such different physical stature and who put so much different force into the bike, be that pedaling force or steering inputs, how can it be that their riding experience, by their own report, is basically identical? How do you get that? What is, Luke, I'll turn to you. What is Rider First Engineered and how does it work?
So Rider First Engineered, we introduced that concept back in, I think, Tarmac SL5, 2015 or something like that. But really, actually, those concepts date earlier than that. We're working with Quickstep at the time in the 2000s, and getting feedback from the team from different sized riders, like they're not feeling the same feeling, right? We're getting feedback from different types of riders.
Like maybe a small rider would say, this bike is beating me up,
Beating
and
me
a
up.
big one would say, this is too flexible.
Tom Bonin specifically.
Okay, let's name names. Here we go. Tom Bonin. May have heard of that guy.
So some of those earlier riders were very influential in how we ended up designing road bikes and bringing in that concept of rider first engineering. And so that started to really kind of infuse kind of our thinking and just kind of how we approach bike design. On the kind of physical elements of the bike itself, it's like the tube shapes, they scale with the size of the bike. The layup will scale as well, and materials to give that. Basically, when you take a frame and you size it up, the tubes get longer, so they're prone to more flex. And also bigger riders, just on average, tend to be stronger, just as more mass there. And so we want to mitigate that flex, right? So getting the tubes bigger, changing the layup to give the rider consistent experience. That goes with Geo as well, right?
Yeah, I would say Luke was saying everything's scaled, but it's not just a simple linear, this is 20% bigger, so you make it 20% more of that. Like, there's a lot that goes into it, and it's a thing that we have a lot of insight and experience with now after over a decade of doing it, right? So it's kind of become part of our routine when developing a bike or a whole size run of bikes, but it's not just a straightforward thing anybody can click a button and do.
And so just recapping a little bit, Rider First Engineered means looking at each rider, the size of the rider, how they're riding, and then understanding the target for the way the bike is going to handle, and essentially engineering the chassis, the whole system, for the parameters of that rider. And what you notice when you look is it's not a simple scaling. Each frame is designed individually based on the parameters and then the test results that we're seeing in the lab, in the field, and corroborated by advanced computer modeling as well.
And this is stuff you don't see again. It's the layups and materials as well.
Yeah.
And bring that back to Future Shock. That's why a big goal for the Future Shock 3 was to make it tunable, right? So that you can tune it to your preferences as a rider.
I actually adjust my Future Shock fairly regularly based off of the use case. For a race where I know I'm going to be really needing the maximum kind of absorption from the shock, I'll adjust springs, spacers, keep it open. There's other races, here in Vermont where I live, it's relatively smooth gravel, but there's still sections when you hit washboard and it's unpredictable. So, I will dampen down, stiffen up the spring just to accommodate for the roads that I'm riding. And it's a super simple way to make those adjustments.
It's on this. I have the stiffest spring in there, and that just allows that if I want to run it open a whole race, I don't even have to think about it. It'll do its job when it needs to, and then when you're on smooth road, you won't even feel it's there.
When Brad first built it, he was, let's put the stiffest spring, put all the tokens in there, and then, which is the same thing that Matt had. And I instantly said, I can't move this. I have to put so much pressure on those handlebars to get any sort of feedback. So we actually took a few of the tokens out and went down to the medium one, which gives me still enough stiffness that I don't get the feeling of so much activation on the handlebar, but yet it still moves enough that helps with a lot of the dampening.
So Ben, you asked about geometry, and I think there's geometry in terms of, minor tweaks and tuning for Rider First Engineered, but in this case, the handling geometry is a big story with the Diverge,
Yes.
and we have rider feedback and inputs on that were pretty different per size. And so the great example on this Diverge is the size-specific reach adjustments we made to the platform. We have field testers and riders we trust, like Matt and other riders internally, and they said, hey, on my big 58 or 61, I'm running this real long stem, my weight's too far over the front wheel, I don't love the handling. And so we pushed out the reach a dramatic amount on a 61, 15 millimeters longer than before on what was already a pretty progressive bike. But then on the smallest sizes, we see riders are running quite short stems already, and in some cases maybe struggling to get enough weight over the front wheel. So we didn't touch the reach on those smaller sizes, and we looked at each size across the range, made the right adjustments. It's
Awesome. Thank you for pointing out that detail. Yeah. So the geometry, you're saying you morphed to fit the rider body, but also to result in the weight distribution and the handling characteristics that would optimize, again, coming back to those parameters you were looking for. You were looking for the performance, you were looking for the capability, and you were looking for the confidence. That's amazing. And it's really coming through. They both say it feels so much more confident. My weight is right where it needs to be, and I'm going right where I want on the bike. That's really wild. I mean, that's a level of detail you don't often see. Okay, so we kind of came into a little bit of a conversation about geometry by way of Rider First Engineered. But I want to ask you, Stuart, in this area of gravel, where some are riding for adventure, some are riding competitively, everything's morphing quite a bit with the terrain and the length of the ride, everything's happening. You guys need to make some decisions around the geometry of the frame. I've heard you talk about Diverge 4 as progressive geometry. Talk a little bit about what your goals were with geometry. What were you hearing from riders, and what changes will riders see in the numbers? But more importantly, what does that feel like as a riding experience? Talk to me about geometry, Stu.
Cool. So progressive geometry for Specialized, has often meant the bike in numbers is long, slack, and low. There's this feeling of riding in the bike that you hear people talk about, especially with our mountain bikes. And that's something we wanted to replicate in gravel and with the Diverge especially. We don't just want to go overboard and make a bike that's like a tanker and you can't change direction and can't maneuver, right? It's still got to be a precision performance bike, but with the capability that when you're in that rough terrain, you're not, in over your head. So when it comes to the Diverge specifically, I said long, slack, and low. We talked about reach being progressively longer per size. The head tube angle is almost a degree slacker on most frame sizes, which helps get the front wheel out in front of you a little further, allows for bigger tires that riders are using these days without toe overlap. And then thirdly, I think a thing that riders are really going to feel is the lower bottom bracket. So the BB drop is now 85 millimeters on every size, one of the lowest gravel bikes out there, and gives you a really planted feeling.
I like what you said, the riding in the bike, and that's instead of kind of on the bike. And when you're riding in that technical terrain, feeling like you're in the bike is that confidence you're talking about, and then you can have the capability to really send it. What are the major differences from the previous Diverge to the Diverge 4 that people will notice?
Really just the feel that you get from the Diverge 3 to Diverge 4. More planted, more in the bike, which is great when you're going down steeper terrain. You don't feel like you're going over the top, but also just cornering in general, right? Your weight's down lower, you're more stable in the bike and not as kind of loose and chattery.
That sounds great for the technical stuff. I think there might be people thinking, whoa, that sounds kind of like a mountain bike, and does this thing end up, being sluggish and not responsive, like to pedal input, or when I'm climbing, how does that feel? Or when there's a quick direction change, maybe I'm racing and I'm behind someone who's squirrely and I got to change lines, right? Sometimes it looks like there's a good line and it's not a good line and you got to change in a hurry. Yep. I don't know which one of you wants to take that, but I want to hear, how is this bike not a slug when you need to change direction fast? How does it remain nimble?
I think this goes back to actually our prototyping and riding bikes, being riders ourselves, and having great riders we can turn to for input, right? You can't just make these geo changes on paper or throw some numbers out there and call it a day. You've got to ride the bike in these setups, risk going too far, say, oh, that didn't feel so good, and bring it back to a place that does feel good. So
going too far actually is a good point, and we intentionally do that, especially with like geometry. Actually, on the Diverge, I think it was 3 maybe. We made some prototypes that were out there.
Maybe a really lax head angle.
Yeah.
Okay.
when you get too slack of
Yeah.
a head tube angle and the terrain starts turning up, the bike is super wandery. You can't stay on top of it
Yes.
and control it, and it becomes really apparent quickly.
But
that
you
is
kept
too
it.
steep.
You took it out of theory, and you built the mule. You built a prototype,
Yep.
and then rode it,
For sure.
and got really the feedback from yourselves, and I'm assuming from the top riders as well. And so you knew it wasn't an assumption. You tried it.
We did,
Amazing.
and with our prototyping capabilities, like we're not making this out of like billet aluminum or anything. We're making out it's a carbon prototype basically, just with a slightly adjusted geometry, so it feels like a Diverge should, right? So
Amazing.
we're kind of comparing apples to apples when we prototype.
Yeah, and isn't that so cool? Like you guys see the way people are riding, and then you see the limitations that the product is putting on the progression. Then you answer that with a bike like Diverge 4. All of a sudden, people will take all that and go wherever they go with it. You guys will see that, and then the next version will play on that. It's a real conversation between rider, what's the edge of the evolution of a riding experience, how can the product evolve to answer that and continue evolving and progressing.
Anticipating what the future will be, because at the time when we designed the product, there's a runway to getting it out to riders, right? So that's where the insights of product managers like Stu and others, like they're out there all the time in markets, at races, participating in the races as well, and then essentially looking in the crystal ball and like what's the future for this category.
There's strategic improvements that are made with thought. Of course, you could go back to the drawing board and be like, hey, we're going to come out with a new Diverge 4 that looks completely different to the old bike. But all the positive attributes of Diverge 3 and even really Diverge 2 are still there. And it's an evolution of a bike rather than a new bike or a different name. It's the evolution of a bike, which I think is very much where gravel is at the moment. Is things are moving now quickly, but also with strategic kind of foresight into like what do the riders want, and also where are the courses of these gravel events going? And it's not just races. It's bike packing. It's bike touring. It's really I think the doors of what gravel is, they've really been open. I think traditionally it was, it looked a lot like Midwest, Kansas roads, and slowly as gravel's grown around the world, the capabilities of the bike have also needed to grow to accommodate for those new terrains.
Okay, so I think we got a lock on what progressive geometry means. In general, as you said, Stu, longer, lower BB, more relaxed, generally, but important caveat, all of that balanced against real world experience so that the bike still is going to climb, respond in the way that you want. I want to pick up on something, Stu, that you mentioned just briefly, and that was tire size. It's been evolving. On the road, it's been evolving. On the mountain, it's been evolving. And definitely in gravel, it's been evolving. I mean, the first Diverge had clearance, I think, for a 35. Long wind up to the simple question, what's the tire clearance on the Diverge 4? People are really going to be curious about that.
Yeah. So the Diverge 4 is built with ISO tire clearance for 700 by 50 millimeter tires.
50.
So that gives you a generous about 8 millimeters of clearance with those tires mounted. And if you want, you can even run 29 by 2.2 inch mountain bike tires with a little bit less clearance.
Amazing. Those are the tires that people are running on crazy, cross country courses, which are getting really technical. And so you could ride that on terrain like you ride a lot of mountain bikes. That's amazing. So big tires, and then that's all the way down to the small sizes too? Yeah,
so every size, front and rear, carbon or alloy, all have the same tire clearance, which is really nice.
That's amazing. And we'd be remiss if we didn't say that when we're talking about smoother is faster, one of the most crucial areas to gain compliance is in the tire. So a bigger tire obviously enables more compliance, a smoother, faster ride. We've been champions of that from early days, supple casings and lower pressures and larger volume to float over stuff. So this is probably the quintessential example. The Diverge 4 up to 2.2 mountain tires, you're not going to be held back. And that's with clearance. That's absolutely incredible. Anything to add to that? How did you package that, Luke?
The packaging is not easy.
No.
Especially like in the rear, right? Around the chain ring and tire and chainstay. you're trying to pass the chainstay through it's a pretty large object. So the easy way is to just grow your chainstays until everything clears, but then the balance of the geometry is not right. So the chainstay is only increased by 5 mil. And yeah, the secret there is basically getting a thin chainstay that's still stiff enough. So there's some tricks with molding and materials that we use there.
I see. So on that drive side, where you're competing for real estate between a fat tire, a chainstay that's a highly loaded part of the bike,
and a chain ring.
and your chain ring, which you're hemmed in, right? The size of the tire is
You are.
what it is. The chain ring is where it is. You don't want to grow that Q factor, so you're going
And if
like
something
a duck.
starts rubbing, you could wreck your bike. So we don't want that at all, right?
Yeah, and so that critical area there at the chainstay, you guys did some special magic on the drive side to create the clearance. Is that right?
Yeah, basically the chainstay gets into a pretty thin profile there, which hey, you can do, but when you have a thin profile, well, that's prone to flex, right? So yeah, there's, again, like I say, there's some tricks with molding and materials to mitigate some of that to still have kind of a rigid rear end.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I think Luke's underselling kind of the complexity here. Like,
Go.
I could
There's-
go down the rabbit hole. It's gonna
Yeah.
take a long time to explain.
Well,
but there's
we
something
want to
really
hear about it. This is a podcast format. Stu, lay it on us.
No,
What
I mean-
did Luke and his team do that made that possible? Because I don't know that I've ever seen these specs of chainstay length that's right where you want it, combined with the tire width, and we know we didn't cheat on like power transfer or handling characteristics. So that's a pretty tricky endeavor. Shine a light on Luke and his team.
Yeah. So this is actually something we pioneered with the Diverge 3 platform, but we have a solid chainstay. So most carbon bikes and structures have this hollow molding, right? So there's some breathing room on the inside there. Well, this bike is solid. Basically pulls that whole area together and
It's solid only for for that region in that
So
tight
from the bottom
interference, yeah.
bracket shell through the narrows of that tight real estate, you guys went with basically a solid chainstay, so your profile would be narrow.
Yeah, it's only
and
solid.
then it opens up.
It's only solid in the narrows, then basically opens up to a hollow section as it
Yeah.
gets into the BB and with more clearance. Yeah.
Yep. And of course, looking at unique features like that in the context of the whole system it operates in, because I know that holistic design philosophy is central to everything you're doing on the engineering side. Because you don't ride just a chainstay,
You don't ride. Hopefully, you're not riding just a chainstay.
and you don't ride just a frame. You're riding a frame
Yeah, for sure.
with wheels, with tires, and the whole thing works together. But that also means when you look at a feature like that, you're probably thinking holistically, how will the loads move through the frame?
For sure.
How do we handle that?
And if you've been in our test lab, but for anybody who's been in there, it's a torture chamber, and you see, everything will break at some point, right? Just a matter of how long and by how much. So yeah, we put our bikes through the ringer in the test lab. So our test standards are what they are. We're not going to lower those just because the design is complicated or maybe complex to achieve. So we first and foremost is quality and durability for the rider.
One last thing tied to all of this is the drivetrain you run and the chainring size you use. We see big, strong, fast, professional riders riding chainrings that I didn't even think, imaginable a few years ago, but you can still run a 50 or 52 tooth ring, what those riders are with
Wow.
the big transmission drivetrain, or you can run 2x GRX or SRAM, gravel drivetrains if you want. So we still have a super wide range of drivetrain compatibility and chainring sizes. No compromises there.
Fantastic. Yeah, and just rooting this back to what you said at the very beginning, you guys were looking at the way people were riding. You wanted to make a bike that was very capable. The tires, we've talked about the geometry in very specific terms. That's going to be capability. That translates to confidence, all the while with a focus on performance and speed in the machine. I want to talk a little bit about a really cool feature, something that we pioneered in the early days on the mountain and then now has come over to gravel, often replicated, never duplicated, and that is the down tube storage of SWAT. Is there any difference between the SWAT that people are going to find on the Diverge 4 and what was on the previous Diverge? If so, what are those differences, and why does SWAT make so much sense for a gravel bike?
So SWAT, first of all, stands for Storage, Water, Air, and Tools, right? It's this comprehensive thought process we have of where can we store all the things that you take with you riding. In the down tube, things are protected. They're out of the way. They leave room in your pockets or on the bike for some of the other things you're going to take. So that's why it's really critical. Coming from the Diverge 3, which was the first gravel bike with SWAT storage, we've upped the ante and borrowed from our friends on the mountain bike team in the SWAT system they developed. So it now has a flush door, super clean, super well sealed, a super nice, amazing latch mechanism, right? Everything is super solid and secure. And then beyond that, it looks great, and there's even more storage space in the frame than before.
My favorite thing about the SWAT thing is that you leave it in there and you forget about it, especially with the new SWAT system. It's a lot more waterproof, so you don't have to worry about dust getting in there, water damage, or anything like that. For me, like, my biggest annoyance that I have with myself is I kind of have the same saddlebag that kind of moves around, and then I got to take stuff for that for racing. But any bike that I have SWAT, it's just all my stuff stays there and I just forget about it and I never touch it. So I'm always like ready to go and very prepared on the bikes that have that type of storage.
Fantastic. So the same SWAT technology that someone would find on the Epic, for example, is now on the Diverge 4. Great interface, very smooth operation, super well sealed, and as you mentioned, everything you need for trailside repairs is on the inside. Doesn't get muddy, but also you don't think about packing it all the time. You don't have to load that on your back or in your pockets. You can carry food, you can carry water. I know people have really appreciated SWAT. I know I love it, mainly because I don't need to think about anything. I know it's in the
always
bike.
there. Yeah.
It's always there. It's always there. Exactly right. All right, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something that maybe doesn't get as much attention as other aspects, and that is, we talk a lot about what we're doing at Carbon. What are we doing for Boswell's bike? What are we doing for da-da-da-da-da? And we talk about Carbon, and we love that, right? And a lot of people watching this podcast, that's going to be what they're thinking about. But let's talk about what you guys have done on the aluminum Diverge 4, because I'm particularly impressed with how much performance you were able to bake into that. When you look at the aluminum chassis made of E5 alloy on the Diverge 4, what are you most proud of that bike offers, and why is it significant?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really proud that it offers the same ride experience, the same promise we give to the Carbon rider that aluminum rider gets, right? So whether it's in the frame itself, the features it has match the Carbon bike, or just the ride experience and specs, like, they're all top notch. They're all things I'd be proud to tell my friends to buy or proud to ride myself.
I love that. And Luke, you said the same thing. You look at the parameters, you look at the ride quality that you want to deliver, you look at the performance, and then you say, how do we translate that in the material? Full-fledged performance machines brought to fruition in E5 aluminum alloy. That's really cool, really cool. And with the SWAT right in there. So you even get SWAT. I love that so much.
Okay, funny thing about the SWAT, and most people will never know or hear this, but it turned out to be way harder to make this SWAT down tube on the Diverge than the Stump Jumper Evo. So the way the pedaling forces are and the amount of stress in going through there, it was an almost insurmountable challenge that we almost threw in the towel, but the team really rallied and figured out how to make that come to life in the final version. So
amazing. Shifting gears a little bit here, I want to pull back. We started kind of with a wide angle. What is gravel? Where did it come from? I want to now ask, where is gravel going? And I want to turn that to you, Stu. When you think about how this bike, the Diverge 4, will impact gravel, what you see with riders, with events, with adventure, what's happening? Where's gravel going? Get out your crystal ball.
Yeah, I mean, where's gravel not going? It feels like it's going in all the directions. There's geographic differences, right? In Europe, the scene is super focused on like these UCI races. They are fast. They're raced like road races, right? A lot of aggressive riding. There's, everything from that to these really long endurance slogs in the US or North America where races are getting longer and longer and they're 200, 350 miles or 400 miles and you're just out there, all day and night riding. And then there's that adventure side. We see riders taking on bigger and bigger challenges individually or in events. And then there's just the riding scene and the culture. And I think this is one of the more exciting things within gravel is as people, experience it, get a gravel bike, they venture out their back door and start riding in places they didn't realize they could ride before. And I know, for me, that's become a big thing. There's so many more places I ride, fun little rides to do, different people you can ride with. And so gravel's going all those directions and more. And I think the Diverge is really well set to support riders in, pretty much any of those experiences they want.
Stu, I love what you said. Where's gravel going? It's expanding in all directions all at once, a little bit like the universe. But I also was really struck in the conversation with each of you, how you brought everything back to the rider. And each rider, as they approach gravel, really have a palette to be able to paint the world with that bike in whatever way they want. And those same fundamental drivers of adventure, exploration that led to Mike's original trip to Europe that led to Specialized are present for everybody. So whatever people are interested in, you can do it on a Diverge. If you're interested in a micro adventure on a Tuesday evening after you get back from work, Diverge is there for you. You want to do Unbound and measure your wattage and your calorie intake and incremental gain, Diverge is there for you. You just don't want to think about it. Keep your tools in the down tube. SWAT's there better than ever. Smooth, capable, high performance machine that allows riders to do whatever it is they want to do on the bike. And I think that's a noble endeavor. It's kind of what I think motivates us at Specialized more than anything, is to share what the bicycle can be in people's lives, because it's a life-changing machine.
For sure.
All right.
It's changed our lives, right?
Yeah. So Luke, thank you so much. Stuart, thank you so much for sharing all the effort you put in, and you guys are representing a big team. So recognizing everyone who's had a hand in this bike that made this possible. It's really exciting moment.
We're stoked.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everyone. Super fun.
Dynamite. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to tune in to the next ones, because we've got a lot of exciting conversations in store with the creators and the riders who are working hard to make the products that'll make your ride better. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, have fun out there.